Hello and welcome to the Times of India. You're watching Global Pulse with me, Neha Khanna. The eyes of the world are on the big Alaska summit between US President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin, scheduled for Friday the 15th of August. Trump and many others are hoping that there can finally be a breakthrough in the Russia-Ukraine war that has now gone on for 3.5 years. The question is, can Trump and Putin agree on a ceasefire and finally end this war? Or could the Alaska summit end up as a mere photo op? Or worse, lead to a further flare-up in tensions among the key players? Here's where the major stakeholders currently stand, at least in terms of their public posture. During a high-level meeting with his top aides, Putin today said, "The current American administration is making, in my opinion, quite energetic and sincere efforts to stop the hostilities, stop the crisis, and reach agreements that are of interest to all parties involved in this conflict." Putin added that peace will be strengthened between Russia and the United States as well as the wider world if the two countries reach agreements in the field of nuclear arms control. By contrast, the US president struck a somewhat discordant note. On the eve of the much-anticipated summit, Donald Trump, who, as we all know, desperately wants a Nobel Peace Prize, has issued a dire warning to Putin. Trump told reporters that there will be very severe consequences if Putin doesn't agree to stop the Ukraine war after the Alaska summit. French President Emmanuel Macron said on Wednesday that Trump was very clear in a virtual meeting with European leaders that the US wants to achieve a ceasefire at the US-Russia summit. Trump added that territorial issues pertaining to Ukraine will only be negotiated by the Ukrainian president. In the same meeting, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky told the group of leaders that Putin is bluffing ahead of the planned meeting with Trump. Zelensky said Putin is trying to apply pressure on all sectors of the Ukrainian front in an attempt to show that Russia is capable of occupying all of Ukraine. The Ukrainian president said Putin is also bluffing about sanctions as if they do not matter to him and are ineffective. In reality, sanctions are very helpful and are hitting Russia's war economy hard, he said. The French president has also told the media that following the Friday meeting, Trump will seek a future trilateral meeting, one involving Trump, Putin and Zelensky. Macron said, "I think that's a very important point in this regard, and we hope that it can be held in Europe, in a neutral country that is acceptable to all parties." German Chancellor Friedrich Merz had convened the virtual meetings in an attempt to make sure that European leaders and the Ukrainian president are heard ahead of the Alaska summit. Zelensky says he has serious doubts that Putin would negotiate in good faith. He wrote on social media, "There's currently no sign that the Russians are preparing to end the war. Pressure must be applied on Russia for an honest peace. We must take the experience of Ukraine and our partners to prevent deception by Russia." Trump has said he wants to see whether Putin is serious about ending the war, which is now in its fourth year. He described the Friday summit as a feel-out meeting where he can assess the Russian leaders' intentions. But Trump has disappointed and worried allies in Europe by saying Ukraine will have to give up some Russian-held territory. He's also said Russia must accept land swaps. European allies have been pushing for Ukraine's involvement in any peace talks, fearing that discussions that exclude Kiev could favor Moscow. Zelensky says Putin wants Ukraine to withdraw from the remaining 30% of the Donetsk region that it still controls as part of a ceasefire deal, a proposal the Ukrainian leader has categorically rejected. Zelensky maintains that Ukraine will not give up any territory it controls, saying that would only serve as a springboard for a future Russian invasion. Now, just weeks after Trump was re-elected to the White House, his administration took the leverage of Ukraine's NATO membership off the table, something that Putin has demanded, and signaled that the EU and Ukraine must handle security in Europe now while America focuses its attention elsewhere. European Union officials fear that Trump may be satisfied with simply securing a ceasefire in Ukraine and is probably more interested in broader US geostrategic interests and great power politics, aiming to ramp up business with Russia and in some ways rehabilitate Putin. The stakes at the summit are extremely high, not only for Ukraine, Russia, Europe and the United States, but also for India. And therefore New Delhi will be closely watching this meeting as well. Here's why. US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent has warned that Washington would increase secondary tariffs on India and that the decision would depend on the outcome of Trump's meeting with Putin. In a television interview, Bessent said, "We've imposed secondary tariffs on Indians for buying Russian oil, and I could see that if things don't go well, then sanctions or secondary tariffs could go up." Earlier this month, Trump imposed a 25% penalty on India in addition to 25% tariffs for buying oil and weapons from Russia. And what's worse, the Trump administration is now goading the European Union into following suit. Bessent said, President Trump is meeting with President Putin and the Europeans are in the wings carping about how he should do it, what he should do. The Europeans need to join us in these sanctions. The Europeans need to be willing to put on these secondary sanctions. That's what Bessent said. The question is, what exactly do Trump and Putin want from this high-stakes meeting? Can the two leaders offer what the other wants? Will that be acceptable to Ukraine and Europe? Can Trump and Putin end the Russia-Ukraine war during this summit? Or could tensions escalate further if the two strongmen do not see an outcome they desire?
Will Russia face any consequences if Vladimir Putin does not agree to stop the war after your meeting on Friday?
Yes, they will. Yeah.
What will the consequences
there will be
be?
consequences.
Sanctions, tariffs?
There will be, I don't have to say, there will be very severe consequences, yes.
И второе, рассказать о том, на каком этапе мы находимся с американской администрацией сегодняшней, которая, как всем хорошо известно, предпринимает, на мой взгляд, достаточно энергичные и искренние усилия для того, чтобы прекратить боевые действия, прекратить кризис и выйти на договоренности, представляющие интерес для всех вовлеченных в этот конфликт сторон, для того, чтобы создать долгосрочные условия мира и между нашими странами, и в Европе, да и в мире в целом, если мы к следующим этапам выйдем на договоренности в области контроля над стратегическими наступательными вооружениями.
Звісно, ми обговорили сьогодні ситуацію на полі бою. Я сказав президенту Сполучених Штатів Америки і всім нашим європейським колегам, Путін блефує. Він старається натиснути перед зустрічю на Алясці, на всіх напрямках українського фронту. Росія намагається зобразити, що спроможна окупувати всю Україну. Безумовно, це їх бажання. Також Путін блефує, начебто санкції для нього не важливі і що вони не працюють. Насправді санкції дуже допомагають і б'ють по російській воєнній економіці.
All right. What can we expect from the highly anticipated Trump-Putin summit in Alaska? Let's put that question to our guests. Joining me on Global Pulse tonight is Lada Garland. She's a geopolitical strategist and president and chair of the International Ukrainian Crisis Fund. Thanks very much, Lada Garland, for joining us. We also have on the show Dr. Umit Nazmi Hazir. He's a political scientist and joins us live from Moscow. Thanks very much to both of you. Lada Galan, if I could begin with you. What are your expectations from the much hyped Trump-Putin Alaska summit? And are you concerned about the fact that Ukraine is missing from these talks?
What we all expect to come out of these talks is we certainly expect to see a ceasefire. That would be the ideal case scenario. And that is certainly what we hope to have out of this. However, the fact that Ukraine is not included, I think doesn't feel great to President Zelensky or the Ukrainian people. But the reality is this is the way that we expected this to go, and there will be a follow-up summit if a ceasefire is agreed upon that does include Zelensky. And so we have to be realistic in this situation. Putin's ego is quite big, and it's absolutely standard that it's Trump and Putin meeting to kind of set some sort of terms. I wouldn't be concerned of Trump giving anything away in the first meeting. I think the goal of this is just to have a ceasefire agreement and see where the conversation can lead to from this point. Russia understands that heavy secondary sanctions can follow. Nobody's disillusioned here. That will significantly affect third countries who are continuing to do significant business with Russia. So we certainly hope to have a ceasefire come out of this and a follow-up talk.
Certainly hoping to see a ceasefire. I can tell you that the entire world is waiting with bated breath for this war to come to an end. John Rosamondo, Senior Defense Policy Analyst, is also joining us now from Washington, D.C. Dr. Hazir, please give me a moment. I will be with you in just a moment. But John, if I could ask you this question, since you only have a few minutes with us. The expectations from the summit are sky high, yet people are treading very cautiously. We just don't know what to expect. This is Trump and Putin, two strong men coming together to hold talks to end a war that has now gone on for 3.5 long years. The question is, how optimistic can one really be at this stage that an outcome of the summit is going to be a ceasefire, something that has been extremely elusive so far?
Well, I think that, one has to be cautiously optimistic because, you have Trump and Putin face to face. Trump believes in personal diplomacy, and he's hopeful that, he can prevail on Putin face to face. But Putin has shown repeatedly that he doesn't care to abide by any agreements that he signs. Right now, Putin holds all the cards, and if, to quote Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban, Russia has basically won the war. I mean, you're going to have the Ukrainians make concessions. One of the discussions is that you'd have sort of a North Korea, South Korea situation where you have a ceasefire and the non-recognition of Russian ownership of the territories that it controls.
John, you interestingly said there that Putin seems to hold all the cards. Now, isn't that the reason why it's been so difficult to end this war? President Putin has been very keen. Ever since he's been re-elected to office, he's been saying that his top priority really is to put an end to this war. But, on the eve of this summit, he's struck what some might say is a rather discordant note. He said there'll be very serious consequences for Putin if he doesn't agree to a ceasefire at the end of this summit. Now, I think we can all agree that Putin does not react very well to threats. What really do you think we can expect from this summit? Would it be too much to ask for a ceasefire straight away? Or do you believe that this summit, for starters, could set the stage for subsequent talks that might also involve Kiev? clearly the Ukrainian president is not very happy at being left out.
Well, I think that you have optimism that recognition again that the Russians have won the war. I think that it's an unfortunate circumstance. The front lines have hardly budged in almost 2 years, and the Russians are on the march in the Donbass. So the only way that you're going to end this war is to recognize that the Russians aren't going anywhere from the territories they control, and basically have a frozen conflict in Ukraine with the front lines where they are now.
You know, John, that seems to be a very problematic proposal for Ukraine and indeed for Europe. Let me tell you what President Zelensky has said. Zelensky says Putin wants Ukraine to withdraw from the remaining 30% of the Donetsk region that it still controls as part of a ceasefire deal. And that is not something that is acceptable at all to Ukraine. Ukraine will not give up any territory that it controls, because if we do that now, it will only serve as a springboard for a future Russian invasion. And it's not just Zelensky. There are many European leaders who are wary of a similar demand that Trump is making of Ukraine, saying that today it's Ukraine, tomorrow it could be one of us in Europe.
Well, I think that we're dealing with reality. The idealism is the Russians would leave tomorrow. The Europeans don't have any ability to throw the Russians out. And, how many hundreds of thousands of people have to die before, we have a ceasefire? I think the best thing to do is to, embrace a ceasefire. Maybe don't legally recognize the Russian annexation of these territories, but work to make so the Ukrainian army is so powerful that there is no way the Russians would even attempt to go across the armistice line, just like we have in Korea, where we've had a ceasefire for 70 years.
John, let me tell you, many reports suggest that Ukrainians as well as European Union officials fear that all Trump wants is a ceasefire, and he doesn't really care about what Ukraine may need to give up in return. Trump is far more focused on broader US economic and geostrategic interests rather than in defending Ukraine's territorial integrity and sovereignty. That, Trump is probably looking to offer some business deals or trade deals to Putin in return for a ceasefire. While that may work out very well between Russia and the United States, that's not likely to be acceptable to Ukraine.
Well, you're right. I mean, it's not acceptable to Ukraine. But, what cards does Zelensky have? I mean, his army is, although it's fighting better than it did 2 years ago, the former chief of staff of the Ukrainian army, Valery Zaluzhny, said that the army has uneven training and it doesn't have the ability to throw the Russians out. It has symbolic victories, blowing up bridges and things like that. But at the end of the day, boots on the ground is what determines who won and lost the war. So Ukraine, Zelensky is going to have to, as we say in America, swallow some crow and accept reality. And that's the whole thing President Trump's team has been saying. We have to accept reality. I mean, I've dealt with General Kellogg, who's Trump's Ukraine envoy before, and I know his thinking. It's all about dealing with reality rather than idealism. Hey, I'd love to be a billionaire, but I'm not.
The trouble is that reality can be altered again and again and again. Putin did that with the annexation of Crimea in 2014. He's trying to do that again now. And who is to say he will not do it again in the future? I think that is what Ukrainians and Europeans are asking. But I will come back to you, John Rosamondo, in just a moment. Dr. Umit Nazmi Hazir has been listening patiently. Dr. Hazir, you've heard the other two panelists, Vlada and John. My question to you simply is, the stakes are incredibly high, but do we need to keep our expectations in check ahead of the Alaska summit? Yes, it's a big deal that Trump and Putin are going to come face to face and actually hold talks in an attempt to finally end this war that's gone on for 3.5 years. But frankly, it's easier said than done, given that at least as far as Russia and Ukraine are concerned, the positions haven't changed an inch.
In my opinion, I don't have big expectations in terms of this meeting. However, I think there will be no fail in this meeting, because I would like to start with the recent statements of Dmitry Peskov. He has already today said that, especially, no document is expected to be adopted or signed following these meetings. So what's more, Trump also has some statements today, and he said that I'm not sure whether it will be possible to reach an agreement or not. And he said that I would like to give opportunity both Russia and Ukraine. Therefore, I think this meeting will be not resulted with big consequences, but it will be lay ground for following meetings. And therefore, in order to achieve big results, there must be meeting, especially including Zelensky, Trump, and Putin. Trilateral meetings there must be in order to achieve big results. So in the meeting, which will be taken tomorrow, I don't expect that there will be any document signed.
Okay, you do not believe there'll be any documents signed. You do not believe that we're going to actually see a ceasefire and the war coming to an end as early as the 15th of August,
Yes.
But it could very well set the stage for further talks. That might be a realistic assessment. But before I go back to Vlada Garland, I want to ask you this question, Dr. Hazir. Trump has made some contradictory statements in the last couple of days. On the one hand, he says this is going to be a quote-unquote feel-out meeting. The White House says it's going to be a listening exercise for President Trump. He wants to hear Putin out and understand what it is that Putin wants. But on the other hand, Trump says there are going to be very serious and severe consequences for Vladimir Putin if he does not agree to a ceasefire right at the end of the Alaska summit. What do you make of that?
You know that Trump, especially since he came to power, he has been pursuing policy. It is kind of strategic ambiguity. So it is also same in terms of Iran problem, in terms of also Ukrainian. And consistently, this policy is or way of diplomacy has been pursued or carried out by Trump. It's his way. It's a new diplomatic way, but therefore, within even 24 hours, he can change his mind. So, but on the other hand, it's not very good, because Trump is, especially in Russia, is considered not trustful, not predictable man. So that's why, since Trump came to power, especially Putin has been playing time, especially playing for time with United States. And I would like to also underline that this meeting, which will be taken tomorrow, make it clear that Putin, whether Putin is bluffing or not, we will understand, and we will more understand the real intention of Trump, because both Trump changeable. It is one of the issue or obstacle that why people or why side cannot achieve any agreement. Because on the one hand, Trump is very changeable, unpredictable. It is also issue. On the other hand, Putin has been playing for time with United States. Therefore, even though there have been negotiations which were held, for instance, in Istanbul 3 times, we cannot see any productive results.
Okay, you make fair points. We all know Trump can be not just transactional, but extremely unpredictable. He can change his mind in 24 hours. And also, you are saying he will probably size up Putin to see if he's bluffing or serious about peace. Let me take this back to Vlada Garland. Vlada, you heard what John, our American guest, said a while ago. He says The message from the Trump administration to Ukraine is, you have to accept reality. Putin holds all the cards. John asks, what cards does Zelensky hold? My question to you is, are you seriously concerned that in his attempt to broker a ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine, Trump could pressure Ukraine into accepting a deal which is not favorable to it at all, which could in fact involve giving up a significant amount of its territory? I know President Zelensky has said it's unacceptable, but could you find yourself in a situation where Trump says, take it or leave it?
Well, let's be realistic about what John said. The first is that Russia's military is one of the world's and was one of the world's leading military powers, second most powerful military globally when it comes to global firepower. Ukraine was, like, I think number 20 on that list. What you've seen, it's very hard to say that Russia's winning this war. In fact, they've been humiliated going into a fourth year of fighting, losing hundreds of thousands of soldiers that are either injured or deceased. And that's the reality that they chose for themselves when they came onto Ukrainian land. So it's very hard to say that Russia's winning this war. But I agree with John when it comes to the fact that Ukrainians just don't have the manpower. They do not have the men and the boots on the ground when it comes to continuing this war. The most pressure that Trump can add is by calling the bluff. And calling the bluff coming out of this without a ceasefire is going to be imposing secondary sanctions. Russia cannot continue financially supporting this war when secondary sanctions are imposed. You're going to have, significant trade partners of Russia, like China, like India, like Turkey, like the European Union, like Pakistan, like Serbia, like Iran, that are all going to take a hit. And that is going to be economically devastating for Russia. The question is, how long can Russia continue financing this war? I think that the world understands that. Secondly, you cannot reward terror states. You cannot reward states like Pakistan, states like Russia. You cannot reward a leadership like Hamas in Gaza. This is not a tone to be set for the world. Giving up Ukrainian land will solve nothing. Giving up Ukrainian land is only awarding the aggressor. It is only endorsing terror. Trump understands that Vladimir Putin wants to be seen as Peter the Great, but the reality is he's been seen more like Ivan the Terrible. So I think that Trump is much more realistic going into these talks. I think his first approach and method that he tried was to appease a little bit to Putin's ego, bring Putin to the table with being cordial, polite, respectful, and a bit flattering, if you will. And I don't believe that that's what's happening going into these talks. Trump, understands the Nash equilibrium very well. And this time the talks are very different going in because Trump is getting tired. Trump is transactional and he wants to see results. I think nobody in the world wants to see, except for Russia, results of Ukraine losing land because everybody's realistic that nothing will change. And Ukraine is not going to accept that. And not only do we not want to, we can't. It is unconstitutional.
All right. But one quick question for you, Vlada, before I take this back to John. What if Ukraine finds itself in a situation where Donald Trump says, we are no longer giving you a choice? This is the agreement that has been reached between the United States of America and Russia. And this is the agreement that Ukraine has to accept, because in any case, Ukraine cannot go on fighting this war without the economic and military support of the United States. And if Ukraine does not agree to this deal, does not accept this deal, then we are pulling the plug. What happens then? What options will Ukraine be left with?
Then you will have a reckoning in Ukraine for Zelensky, because Zelensky has set the bar of victory so high, and sometimes that's somewhat unrealistic. that you will have a revolution on your hands pushing Zelensky out of office if he accepts such a deal. It will be very hard for him to do. So I think that there perhaps at that point will enter some sort of negotiation where Zelensky tries to find the middle ground in what can be acceptable, not just to him, but to the Ukrainian people. At the end of the day, every leader wants to stay in power as long as possible. And I believe Zelensky is no different. He realizes that bringing a deal that will cause a revolution and strife in Ukraine is not only beneficial to his legacy, but to, to any kind of a political future for Ukraine. He's not going to want that. He's not going to accept it. But I do believe Zelensky has finally understood Trump's methods, Trump's rhetoric, and is willing to be somewhat negotiable, but not at the cost of giving up large swaths of Ukrainian land. We've been there and it accomplished nothing.
Okay, well, we all recall that very fiery exchange between Zelensky, Trump and J.D. Vance that took place in the Oval Office a few months ago. Frankly, many thought that was very unbecoming of the US president and his deputy. It seemed to be very humiliating back then for the Ukrainian president, but it's good to see that things have improved between them, between then and now. But John, let me come back to you at this point. Lada insists that Zelensky will never accept a deal that involves Ukraine having to give up its territory. I know you say Ukraine has to accept reality. Vlada says, but if Putin doesn't agree to a ceasefire, let's hit him harder with secondary sanctions, and that's going to make a big difference. The counter argument to that is you've already imposed what you've called crippling sanctions on Putin and Russia over the last 3.5 years. That's not stopped the war. My question to you, John, is this. Could there actually be a situation tomorrow where Donald Trump decides he has struck a deal with Putin that involves Ukraine giving up some of its territory to Russia? He tells Zelensky, you don't have a choice. We are funding this war, and we say that the war ends now. What happens in such a situation?
Well, I'll just have to say one thing. The defenders of Ukraine's position seem to think that war of attrition, economic warfare, is how wars are won or lost. Wars are won or lost based on territory. Territory has a vote of its own. The Russians aren't leaving. You don't underestimate the power of a fanatical ideology such as Putin's ideology, of Russian imperialism. The only way that the Ukrainians will see an end to this fighting is to accept that they've lost and then fall back and work to arm the Ukrainian army to the teeth to make it impossible for the Russians to move beyond their territorial holdings. I don't see that the sanctions will have an impact on Putin because he doesn't care about his economic loss. He's backed by Beijing. He's backed by his allies. So he doesn't feel he has anything to lose.
Okay, he doesn't have anything to lose. He doesn't care about sanctions. But then at the end of the day, what can really come out of this meeting, especially because, we have to remember that Kiev is not involved in these talks. At this point, we're joined by another guest from Washington, D.C. We have with us Scott M. Faulkner. He's former first Chief Administration Officer at the U.S. House of Representatives and also an author. Scott Faulkner, thank you very much for joining me on Global Pulse tonight. Your thoughts on this big, much hyped Alaska summit that's going to take place tomorrow between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. Yes, the whole world wants to see an end to the Russia-Ukraine war, but it is easier said than done. With both Ukraine and Russia continuing to dig their heels in, they've not budged an inch from their respective positions. Trump goes on insisting that the war has to end now and there must be a ceasefire. But how is he going to get Putin to sign on the dotted line unless Trump decides, fine, it's time for Ukraine to give up its territory, something which is not acceptable to Ukraine and Zelensky?
This is an epic mistake. I mean, having Trump meet with Putin anywhere on anything is an epic, historic mistake. I mean, many of us remember what happened when Neville Chamberlain met with Hitler in September 1938, dealing with the Sudetenland, which is very similar in terms of ethnic population relating to Germany, the way that Donbass is relating to Russia. So the historic parallels are tragically close. And this is an epic mistake for Trump to meet with Putin in any way, shape, or manner.
Very interesting. Would you care to elaborate on that, Mr. Faulkner? Yes, these are two strong men, mercurial, unpredictable characters who are coming together to discuss a war that frankly has gone on for way too long and which is a source of concern for the entire world. But why exactly are you calling it an epic mistake?
Because Trump's, he's cut a lot of amazing peace deals, like recently in Africa and in Central Asia. But in order to cut deals, you have to have moral equivalency. And to take a totalitarian thug like Putin and put him on moral equivalency with the Ukrainians is grotesque. And I think a lot of people, I mean, unfortunately, a lot of the Trump supporters are very isolationist and like to see Trump cutting these deals, but cutting deals where you're basically destroying the lives of people who are already literally under the gun in the Donbass region and undercutting the sovereignty of a country that we've already committed to the sovereignty of. And then the other part to this, the Donbass region has most of the minerals that are part of the April 2025 deal that Trump signed with Zelensky. So to cede any of that territory, even 1 square inch of it, undermines the agreement relating to strategic mineral development from April. So this is a mistake on every front imaginable.
Let me ask you this question, Mr. Faulkner. You believe this is a big mistake. I'm just playing the devil's advocate. I hold no brief for Donald Trump. What would you say to those who are saying, what's wrong with the man trying to put an end to this war, trying to broker a ceasefire, which has been elusive for the last 3.5 years, because frankly, it's not just Russia and Ukraine. The entire world has paid a very heavy price for this war. At least the man's trying. I mean, I don't know if he's going to win a Nobel Peace Prize that he so desperately seeks at the end of the day. But what's wrong with the most powerful man in the world sitting across the table from Putin and saying, let's put an end to this. It's gone on for too long.
Well, think of if we were in the summer of 1944 and Roosevelt went running off to Tojo in Japan, or Hitler in Berlin and said, you know, the war's gone on for too long, let's stop the killing. No, you have tyranny, you have aggression, you have the destruction of sovereign territory, and to give even, again, basically an equal footing to a person who started this war, who is slaughtering civilians, who has literally been doing war crimes, including the capture and removal of children into Russia. Any kind of moral equivalency, any kind of level playing field is basically a huge victory for Putin, and he doesn't deserve a huge victory.
Okay, you think the summit itself will be a huge victory for Putin. It will accord him legitimacy, something that he does not deserve. Dr. Omid Nazmi Hazir, come in here. Some might argue this is a big mistake. Trump is being given the kind of legitimacy he doesn't deserve. After all, he's a dictator. Mr. Faulkner says, why even equate him with the Ukrainians? But again, the trouble is that if you have to bring an end to a war, you've got to talk to the warring parties. Someone's got to do it.
Yeah, I would like to underline that there has been also some changes in the position of Putin. For instance, initially, Putin was strongly opposed to meeting with Zelensky, but especially in recent days, he said that I'm not strongly opposed to meeting with Zelensky, but there must be some conditions which are not ready. And the process is not ready in order to hold a meeting between Zelensky and me. So Russian position is also not very predictable, because as already mentioned, Trump is also unpredictable. But the statement and rhetoric of Kremlin has also sometimes changed, especially in recent months. So, but especially Russian experts consider that the main point. They consider that Russia has advantage and initiative in the war in the field. That's why many Russian experts believe that Russia should continue the war in Ukraine, because they believe that Russia would be able to capture more and more territory, and Russia has more advantage, especially in terms of soldier. They do believe that Ukraine will much more suffer from the lackness of soldier in the future, and later, especially in the following months, Ukraine will be more unsuccessful according to their opinion. Therefore, many Russian experts consider that we need to continue meetings and negotiations, but on the other hand, we also need to continue the war, because we have some advantage. And I also, finally, I would like to point out that I think if the meeting tomorrow will be not resulted in good ways, or not big results, maybe Trump will withdraw from the negotiations, because especially Trump's more eager to the war will be sponsored by European leaders, and Trump, especially if European Union and European countries will sponsor this war, Trump can withdraw. It's also one of the good options for Trump.
Are you saying that Trump will withdraw from the negotiations alone, or are you saying that Trump could actually pull the United States out of the war itself and say it is now incumbent on Europe to defend Ukraine?
It is one of prominent options for Trump that United States will withdraw from the negotiations, because I think Trump also will not give more and more chance both Russia and Ukraine, because today he has already stated that I will give one more opportunity to both Russia and Ukraine. It marks that there are some I can give more, but in the end of I will give up these negotiations. And it is also, maybe it's not very bad option for Russia, because some Russian experts claim that Ukraine will be unable to hold out until the end. That's why I think right now Russia, especially Putin, playing for time with United States, and Russia show itself that Russia continue negotiations, and it's also one of the way for legitimacy. And in order to break up the policy of the West, especially isolation policy, it's a good way for Russia, and it would also provide Russia to divide, especially deepen the division between European Union and United States. So it's a good way in terms of divide the Western bloc, because since the war started, Russia said that we are fighting against collective West, and one of the grand strategy of Russia make divisions between United States and European Union. That's why Russia continues these negotiations.
I think that's a very interesting point you've made, that for Putin, this is an excellent opportunity to drive a wedge between the United States of America and the European Union. Lara Garland, come in here. Do you agree with Dr. Hauser? You know, because it's all very well for Ukraine to say we're not going to give up our territory, it's not going to achieve anything, you'll only end up emboldening a dictator. But let's not forget, at the end of the day, you're dealing with a very mercurial, transactional and unpredictable man like Donald Trump at the other end. If tomorrow Donald Trump decides that America has funded this war long enough and doesn't want to have anything to do with it any further, and leaves it entirely to Europe and Ukraine to defend themselves, what happens then? Because I think we can all agree that Ukraine's options are very limited, that Russia is in a far stronger position, and Putin does hold all the cards. And as Dr. Hauser said, this might be a great opportunity for Putin to deepen the divide between America and Europe.
Putin has consistently tried to deepen that divide, and I think we saw how different Trump's approach was at the last NATO summit. European countries purchased a significant amount of weapons to restock their stockpiles from the United States, allowing Trump to push and continue to push his American first agenda, it obviously helps boost the U.S. economy. I think that Trump and his team are much smarter than that, despite the rhetoric that we've seen from them previously. He is a negotiator. He wrote The Art of the Deal. And if anyone knows how to bring a deal, it's Donald Trump. I think we are disillusioned to say that this meeting somehow shouldn't happen, or that this somehow is just morally unequivalent. How do you expect to bring the end to a war without actually having dialogue? That just doesn't work that way. And Rob, who's no longer on the call with us, talked about the fact that Ukraine loses, this war, based on military, actions and territory. But wars are lost or won on 5 various points, and that's just one of them. Economic and logistical domination, political and diplomatic pressure are other ways to put pressure to win a war. I agree that Ukraine has not had great territorial gains in the last 6 to 8 months, and I'm not sure that they will have further great territorial gains. We do not have the foot soldiers. I'm, the only Ukrainian currently on the segment. I have a home in Kiev. I was just in Kiev in July, on July 4th, when the massive attack took place with over 500 drones and missiles that came in. I understand this, more than most. It hits home for me. But to say that Trump will pull out of these talks, I don't believe it. One, Trump's ego won't let him do that. Second of all, I think he wants to end the suffering for Ukrainians, and he sees that it's attainable. Whether the peace prize is a factor in that or not, I'm not sure. But Trump has proven that he has brought peace and been involved in multiple conflicts and brought a resolution. So for, to say that he should not sit with Putin, I don't agree with that. And I'm a Ukrainian. We want to see a solution. And if this is one of the steps to seeing that solution, we want to see that through.
Okay, interesting. You don't believe Trump will withdraw from the negotiations, and you certainly strongly disagree with Scott Faulkner, and you believe that even if he is a dictator who's invaded another country, at the end of the day, someone's got to talk to Putin to bring an end to this war. So you do not agree with that argument of a moral equivalence being drawn between Putin and the Ukrainians. But Scott Faulkner, coming back to you. That argument apart, you and Vlada, who's of course a Ukrainian, don't see eye to eye on the fact that this meeting is taking place. Vlada seems to think it's a good thing. The war, after all, needs to come to an end. But my question to you is this. Now that we know that they are meeting, keeping aside the morality of it, what can the two leaders offer each other? Yes, Donald Trump wants a ceasefire. What will he have to offer in return? Ukrainian land? Or is he hoping to buy peace with Putin by offering him some trade deals?
Well, again, there needs to be more pressure put on Putin. The Russian economy is fragile, and you have what they call a ghost fleet or mystery fleet, shadow fleet of 75 oil tankers that the Russians use to send oil to China, to India, and to other places. We should be interdicting those 75 ships, because the oil that flows and shipped on those ships is 35% of the Russian oil exports. That could be a fatal blow to the Russian economy. We should have been doing that like a couple of years ago. But the key is that that's a huge stick that Trump could threaten to force Putin to try to do something different. But in terms of the other piece of the puzzle, you have all these literally tens of thousands of children that have been abducted by the Russian army and sent into Russia. There needs to be an accounting for those. They need to be returned to their families. The other piece of the puzzle is if even 1 square inch of the Donbass is given to Russia, if you think there's been horrendous deaths and all sorts of other horrors, imagine when Russia finally consolidates control over even part of that region. And again, it contravenes the April 2025 mineral treaty that's already been signed between the United States and Ukraine. So I just don't see except for basically letting Putin have his way. And again, Putin wants all of Ukraine. He wants Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania back. He would like to take Eastern Poland back. He would like to take parts of Central Asia back. He is a megalomaniac that wants to rebuild the Soviet Empire, and he's going to do it if the West shows any weakness. And so I just can't think of anything other than, again, if Trump is willing to show his teeth and say, if you don't stand down now without any concessions in your direction, we're going to destroy your economy by interdicting your shadow fleet.
We're going to destroy your economy now. Isn't that a threat that's already been, issued and executed, but it's not stopped Putin from waging this war? Dr. Hazar, come in here. I mean, as I said earlier, the West has already imposed on Russia what it has described as crippling sanctions in the last 3.5 years. And while it may have hurt the Russian economy, no doubt, it hasn't stopped Putin from continuing to wage this war. Therefore, what new threats of economic devastation and destruction can Trump possibly issue to Putin at this point in time? Going back to the fact that the two leaders are holding quote-unquote peace talks in Alaska, I'm going to ask you, Dr. Hazar, even though I know that you're not very optimistic about this summit, what can the two leaders offer each other? Trump wants a ceasefire. What can he offer Putin in return? Do you think trade deals could be used to buy peace with Putin?
I think Russia can maybe offer especially a limited airspace ceasefire, and it is one of the options. And the second one, I think Russia maybe demands Ukraine to withdraw from the remaining 30% of the Donetsk region as a condition of ceasefire. Normally, Russia has been not very eager to sign a ceasefire, and Russia has been strongly opposed to ceasefire. But due to especially separation of Trump and possible economic sanctions, Russia can offer some limited ceasefire or conditional ceasefire, as I already mentioned, such as limited airspace ceasefire. I also would like to mention the situation of Russian economy. There has been not huge inflation in Russia. By the way, as a person who living in Moscow, I can observe, for instance, the percentage rate of inflation is 6%. And Russian economy has been not strongly still suffering from the war. I don't know how it will be in the future, but Russia is still able to manage these economic sanctions and conditions because Russia has prepared for the war before February 2022. Because why? There's a question. Why, especially why Russia captured Crimea, why Russia didn't continue further? Because in 2014, Ukraine didn't have a strong military. Russian military was much more stronger than Ukrainian military, but Russia didn't further, especially in Ukraine, and capture Crimea and some regions of Donbass. And if Russia was intending to capture more Ukrainian territory, it could be possible. Maybe Russia could capture half of Ukrainian territory. But in 2014, Russian economy was not ready. Because Russian economy was not ready to be imposed much more sanctions. That's why they remain in Crimea and some regions of Donetsk. But since 2014, Russia has prepared, especially economically, and Russia has taken into consideration possible sanctions. When we came to 2022, Russia has been much more ready for possible sanctions. That's why they started to implement or they started to conduct this war. And there are some also opinions in the Russian media. Some people claim that even though Iran has been able to resist strong economic sanctions for a long time, Russian economy is stronger than Iran. Therefore, we can resist to strong economic sanctions. So they
I
consider
think you make a good point. Yes, and Russia was prepared. Okay, complete your point.
Last point, I would like to underline that according to Russian worldview, geopolitical priority is much more geopolitical priority, or factors are
Than
much
economic.
more important than economic factors. It is one of the main
Yes.
principles of Russian foreign policy.
Absolutely. That's the main driving force really for Vladimir Putin. And yes, as you rightly acknowledged, fact of the matter is that the Russian economy has withstood sweeping sanctions imposed by the West in the last 3.5 years. Vlada Galin, as we wrap up this conversation, I want to ask you this question. I don't know, nobody knows if there's going to be a ceasefire at the end of the Alaska summit. I mean, it may take a miracle of sorts to make that happen. But if this meeting were to set the stage for a trilateral meeting between Trump, Putin, and Zelensky in the foreseeable future, would you say that would be a somewhat satisfying outcome of this meeting?
Absolutely. I've said from the beginning, I was at the Raisina Dialogues in India 3 years ago, right after this war started. And I said then, and I'll say it again, that it's going to take an end to this war for Putin and Zelensky to meet. And if this can pave the way for that to happen, then it certainly will be a positive outcome in this, incredibly positive. And let's not forget, we can tout how the Russian economy is still doing okay. It's not going to be doing okay when you push through secondary sanctions or go after the shadow fleets that Scott discussed. At the end of the day, let's remember what led to the fall of the Soviet Union: the Afghan war, immense international pressure, and economic crisis. Putin can't afford for it to go that way. He cannot afford to be embarrassed further on the international stage. And that's, Russia's economy spiraling on the global stage is something he cannot afford. Trump has that card. Trump is a much stronger leader than what we've seen in the past, and a much stronger rhetoric coming out of the United States than we've seen. And I truly believe that if this summit will yield a trilateral meeting, then it is the first step to having a successful peace agreement in the future.
That would be a first successful step towards a peaceful resolution of this war. Scott Faulkner, wrap this up for us. Your thoughts. Vlada Galin says that even if we do not have a ceasefire immediately, if this summit can set the stage for a trilateral meeting that eventually involves President Zelensky, that will be a good outcome, and the Alaska summit would have been a success. Would you not welcome that?
The issue is that every morning, Putin wakes up and looks at the map of the old Soviet Union and wants to have that map as the current Russia map. Until he gives up that fantasy of recovering the Soviet Union in total, he is always going to be a threat. And even if we get a ceasefire, even if we get a trilateral agreement, it's only going to be a pause in his overall plans to rebuild the Soviet Union.
Okay, he's not going to stop. How do you get Putin to change his mind? Well, I guess that is really a question that nobody has found an answer to so far. But yes, this is a very high stakes summit, one that we'll all be watching very closely with bated breath. And yes, I think it would be pretty safe to say that the entire world wants this war to finally end. Is that going to happen now with the Alaska summit? Let's wait and find out. On that note, John Rosamando, Dr. Hazir, Vlada Galin, and Scott Faulkner, thank you to all of you for joining me on Global Pulse tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
As we said, it is a high-stakes summit, and the stakes, in fact, are very high, not just for the principal players involved in this conflict, Russia, Ukraine, Europe, and the United States, but also for India. Because remember, secondary sanctions have been imposed on India by the Trump administration for its purchase of Russian oil. And if we do see some sort of a breakthrough coming in at the end of the Alaska summit, that could be big relief for India as well. So everyone's going to watch this summit very closely and keep their fingers crossed. Let's see what comes out of it. Thanks very much for watching Global Pulse tonight.